for Writing and the Adirondack Experience. They supplied a lot of the copies of the book, The People from Heaven. But the program is really the brainchild of Betsy Folwell. So Betsy and Amy are two uh, leaders in conversation today. Betsy had suggested having a book group based on Adirondack books. And this was supposed to be a larger program, a bunch of them taking place at the Adirondack Experience. And we had taken a couple of the books and we were going to have them in different spots. This one was going to be in Warrensburg Library, obviously. Would have been a great spot for it. And this was all Betsy's idea. And what intrigued me the most about it was the idea that someone like Betsy, who arguably knows more about Adirondack books than, well, you certainly, no one knows more than you. There might be a couple people who know as much, but no one knows more. But the idea that she would select which books, that I found that more interesting, that she would choose not the more obvious titles that we've all sort of read. I hadn't read The People from Heaven until, I hadn't even heard of it, honestly, until Betsy suggested it. So that's where the program started. And then she brought Amy along. I want to just quickly, if you're not familiar with either of them, Betsy has been the creative director of Adirondack Life Magazine for a very long time. You started off as the editor and now you're creative director for 20?
I don't know.
It's been a long time.
It's been a while.
And she has, her book Short Carries is newly released as an audiobook with new content on it, and it's beautiful and really well done. And it's a joy to listen to. And Amy Godine is a local historian and scholar. I'd say she contributes a lot to Adirondack Life Magazine, among other publications. And I think it's fair to say that you've probably known best, Amy, for your work on the history of African Americans in the Adirondacks. Is that fair to say? That's been a big piece of the work that she's been doing. Both Betsy and Amy, I rely on them heavily as a program director, because they always are just wonderful speakers, wonderful thinkers, and great company. So I'm very thrilled that they both agreed to talk with us tonight. And with that lengthy introduction, I was trying to make sure that everyone had a chance to come here. I'm going to turn everything over to Betsy and Amy, who is listed as John Nicholson, but that's actually Amy Godine over there in the corner. So thank you all, and welcome.
Thanks.
Yep, welcome everybody. This started out with Adventures in the Wilderness by William H. Murray. We held that at Adirondack Experience in the Ed building, and that was, it seems like years ago. And our next book was An American Tragedy, something that many people are familiar with, but haven't read it in a long time. And yeah, the books on this list, some of them are fairly challenging. And if you've read The People from Heaven, you know what I mean. It's the narrative is all over the place. The characters are, you really need a roadmap to tell who's who. And it's earned its spot as a radical novel because the ideas are different and the form is certainly very different from a 1940s novel where you're presented with a plot that's maybe linear and characters who are, the characters would fit in a station wagon rather than a school bus. So People from Heaven was done in the early 40s by Nathaniel West. I'm sorry, not Nathaniel West, John Sanford. But Nathaniel West is important in this whole scenario because in the 30s, Nathaniel West and John Sanford shared a cabin outside Warrensburg for a summer. And they each, observed the Adirondacks, participated on some levels. And for Sanford, whose given name is Julian Shapiro, he came up with, a cast of characters from a small town who were maybe more diverse than we've seen in novels before the 1940s. There's an African-American woman, there's a Native American guy, there's, the town preacher, the town doctor, the the general store owner, and so on. And I don't know, did many of you get a chance to read the book? I can't see your hands, so just let Natalie or Amy know if you've.
Looks like the majority of them have.
Great. It's not easy to find. And even though it's not a big fat book, it is a little hard to follow. But I remembered reading it 25 years ago and thinking, oh my gosh, this is something very different about the Adirondacks. And at Amy's suggestion, not to just let one perspective on small town life, speak to us. We've included Adirondack Portraits by Jeanne Robert Foster. And Jeanne Robert Foster, pretty interesting life. Born in 1879 in the town of Johnsburg. When she was a kid, her parents were dirt poor. They farmed her out to another family so that she would help around the house and do chores, and they didn't have to feed one extra mouth. She became a school teacher at age 15, and the interesting sidebar to this whole thing is Jeanne Robert Foster, born Julia Oliver, her mom was a college grad, and her mom was a teacher, and her mom instilled in her a real love of learning. So Jeanne went on, school teacher at 15, married at 17, and from all descriptions, it seemed like it was a marriage that, they respected each other. They moved around a lot, Rochester, New York City. And for Jeanne Robert Foster, she was a remarkably beautiful woman. And she was also incredibly bright. And, as a young woman, her career took off first as a model. Some people have said she was the original Gibson girl. No, she was the model for an illustrator whose last name was Fisher. So she was known as the Fisher girl, but a very striking person. And she knew how to charm people. And she charmed Ezra Pound. She charmed T.S. Eliot. She especially charmed John Butler Yates. And to the point where, they were friends, forever. They're buried next to each other in the Chestertown Cemetery. And you can tell John Butler Yeats's grave because there's an Irish flag near it, and there's usually an Irish shilling on the gravestone. So if you make a pilgrimage, look for those things. But, very different people, and very different perspectives on, life in the Adirondacks. One, very much an outsider, one an insider who left. And Amy, I'll turn it over to you for more details if you want to fill them in, because I think your understanding of the radical novel is a lot deeper than mine.
It comes at the very tail end of the great boom in so-called proletarian literature of the 30s. I think it's fair to say he probably gestated this idea in the 30s and mulled it over before it was published in the early 40s. And it keeps company with a number of much better known, maybe better novels or better known novels like Jews Without Money by Michael Gold, or Erskine Caldwell's Tobacco Road, or The Hamlet by Faulkner. Anybody read that one or feel any resonance with that? Yeah. Grapes of Wrath, published in 1934, and Henry Roth's classic Call It Sleep, though that doesn't come out till much later. It's written in the 1930s. But it never makes it. It never makes the critical hit. The New York Times trounces it and complains that the beginning section where he has a million voices, remember the first section? It's quite dramatic and engrossing, hard to keep people straight, easy to get lost. And the critic for the Times, Mark Shore, complains that it has the moldy smell of Spoon River anthology. That's like the opening salvo, and it goes downhill from there, saying that the book has a lot of guts, but he can't he can't deliver on its promise. But never mind that. I mean, it was nonetheless championed in much of the radical press, and he stuck by it and never changed a word of it. And he wouldn't be edited at all, this guy. He was very, very tough on his critics and editors. He goes out to Hollywood and he makes his way as a screenwriter for a while until the McCarthy era sort of puts a dent in that. He keeps writing all his life, and his novels all do spectacularly poorly all his life, but it doesn't stop him. He publishes 22 books. That's a lot of books. And some of them are still in press, in publication. Black Sparrow is his publisher. And that's a long career for a guy who met with no critical acclaim or favor. I got to give him that. That's impressive to me.
Amy, why did his publisher keep publishing him if they were all flops?
I don't think they did. I think this book fell out of favor for ages until it was revived in a Lost Depression Writers series. Maybe, do you know when that was, Bets? Is that it's pretty recently. It's reissued.
It was a university press that revived 5 radical novels in a series.
Yeah. Michigan brings it back in 71. That's a late renaissance for this book. That's a long time out of print. But I heard about it when I came here from people who were friends of his and knew him and Nathaniel West, née Weinstein, when they were summering in, is it pronounced Ville or Vile Lake? Do you know, near Warrensburg?
Oh, Ville.
Ville?
Yep, Ville.
Ville, okay. They rented a cabin. It was this guy's second go-round, John Sanford's, in the region. He'd spent time another summer when he must have been a boy near Long Lake, and then he and West came up here and rented a place and wrote their hearts out. And that's where he obviously gathered the lifelong impressions that fueled this book and its story. I'd love to hear from, I have 2 thoughts, Bets, about how we can approach this. One is to get people's gut reactions to it and what worked for them about the book and maybe what didn't. In other words, to approach it literarily, and then to think about it in terms of what it suggests about a vision or a narrative of the Adirondacks, stepping 2 steps away and looking at it almost as a piece of sociology, false or true, on Adirondack culture, because it is a regional story, an extremely localized story. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it too. What do you think?
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Well, let's not start with us. Who out there wants to venture a first response?
I'll jump in.
Good.
It was very helpful to have read the introduction.
Yeah.
Because it went through a lot of that, although I'm always leery of books that the introduction is, as long as that one is. But even with the introduction, I really struggled with I don't know whether to call them flashbacks, but the back and forth with writing that was done way back and then trying to relate it to the current. I also had a reaction from as you say, a sociology standpoint, a couple things. One was how much has changed, but how much has stayed the same. I think it was not illegal at that point in time to say some of the things that were said, but it seems like what we're seeing is some people still think them, which is really discouraging. I also react to the fact that there were very, very few women portrayed, and those that were, one was a prostitute, one was the Black woman, and there were other women named, but nothing in terms of characters.
Mm-hmm.
And having said all that, America Smith, or whatever her name truly was, what she said at the end was quite chilling.
Yeah.
So those were my reactions.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else? What about, I'm just looking at names here, Mr. Johnston. What did you think? What's your take on it?
Well, I disagree with you on one point, although it's a marvelous book, and I'm very glad to have read it. I don't see it as a regional novel in the way that the Foster book is a regional book. He needed a small town. He's from the city, and so wouldn't have very much familiarity with a small town, except that he did spend time in Warrensburg, just outside of Warrensburg. And so he drew on that. But what he wants to say is something about small town America in the 1940s. And it could have been, I grew up in Michigan, it could have been a small town in Michigan. I think he wanted to particularly say it's the North. So I won't say it could have been a small town in Florida, although I think it easily could have been. But the attitudes, even the manner of speaking among the men strikes me. Like I say, I'm from the upper Midwest, and it seemed entirely familiar to me. And so, unlike the other book we're discussing this evening, I enjoyed them both, but this one seems to me less a regional novel and more really an American novel.
Fair enough. I actually agree with everything you're saying, except I think he might have, well, who knows what a writer's intentions are, and even if they even matter. Yes, it could be anywhere in any northern town, which for me gave it less universality than a kind of generic feel. I kind of missed more specificity and more of a sense of actual place.
Well, I don't think he wanted to say something about the North Country.
Yeah.
I don't think that North Country is a character in the book.
It isn't. You're right.
Hmm.
It's almost interchangeable with a small town in Pennsylvania or Ohio.
Right.
What you're saying. Yeah, Miss Kelly.
Ellen Crayley.
Ellen, hi.
Actually, I agree, and I think that the insertions of the historical documents and writing, which I didn't quite understand, and I would love to have someone help me with that. And I did find myself kind of skimming through some of that prose.
Did anyone else skip this? Not skip. I won't say that.
Quite skip.
A
little bit. I cheated there, but if the North Country isn't a character, I do think that the beauty of describing the weather, the environment, the trees, the rain kind of moving together and forming things that were holistic. There are some beautiful, made me think, oh, I want to be in a rainstorm right now to kind of be thinking about how the trees turn into or blend into the puddles and that sort of thing. So if the character wasn't the Adirondacks, it was deep woods.
Yeah.
And terrain that had significant weather and turns of weather. So I think that was for me, that was prominent.
That world is very full, the natural world, more than the social or built environment. You can feel the woods bearing down. What about Helene? No? Did you want to speak, or I'm not sure. Not really. Jonathan, any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I really admired what he tries to do in the book, in the sense, particularly that he's connecting a very specific local place, we described in a lot of detail, with these much bigger historical forces and this sort of sweep across America and kind of the world in a way. I think that actually both these books we looked at has this kind of connection to the local and a much bigger, more national kind of global picture. And I thought he didn't really perhaps pull off what he was trying to do, but I kind of admired the ambition. I mean, one thing about the kind of nature of the book, and this goes a little bit to I think what Ellen was saying, is that it's actually quite odd, because if you look at the literary debates in the communist movement in this period, there are really two lines. So you've got people like Brecht saying we must do things which are really experimental and don't try and sort of replicate reality, put your politics out there, do things in a very stylized way. And then on the other hand, you've got people like Lukács saying we should do a sort of a left-wing version of Tolstoy and try to be realist.
Yeah.
And this book actually has got both of those going along together. So that way it's quite a sort of unorthodox book. It's got an interesting mixture
Yeah.
of those two things. And maybe the two things don't entirely come together, but he's playing with different things. I think Walt makes the point in the introduction that although he was coming from a communist background, it's not a kind of dogmatic book. It's actually interesting and has literary merit, even if maybe it doesn't entirely work.
And unlike a lot of doctrinaire proletarian fiction, it doesn't resolve with an epiphany of social consciousness, political commitment, a great strike, a movement of the working people of the town together to defend the woman who's just died. It's a little unresolved at the end. I'm not quite sure where we stand at the end. And I think that's one of the virtues of the book, that there's no ribbon, there's no red ribbon that wraps it up. Really. What do you think, Bets?
Well, I also think that each character, it was plotted out to have an agenda and to fill a role.
Yeah.
So it didn't really grow organically the way a lot of novels do, because it's almost as if he had 3x5 cards and and here's Doc Slocum, and he has these attributes and characteristics and talks like this, and here's Mr. Bishop, and it seemed like the deck got shuffled, and then then it all came together, or not so together. I mean, certainly the last scene with the smoldering remains of the church, it's like, whoa, wait, that was fascinating to me.
Helene, are you raising your hand or no? Okay. I agree with you. I think for me that's a problem with the book. I don't feel the characters step out of their assignments and they fulfill them dutifully and predictably right to the end, and that's frustrating. They aren't allowed the language that could let them kind of breathe and grow and surprise us. I rarely felt surprised. That's one grievance I had with the book. I rarely felt like I'd encountered a scene, a dialogue, an exchange, an action. It's not that I could see it coming, it's that it seemed predictable. And that's a failure of imagination that's a problem for a novel, if you feel like you can tell what's going to happen. And that for me was rooted in the dialogue. Not the most creative thing in a way was this effort to engage with the past, which was so ambitious and bold, to bring up every corner of this colonialist, imperialist, racist, racialized history and try and throw it all into the heap. And then he'd retreat to sort of formula in the plot itself. Did anyone else feel that as a problem, or am I exaggerating my response here? No?
Right.
Yeah, you sense that too?
Yeah, I definitely did, because it seemed like, well, it seemed forced, of course. But the first time I read this book, I was new to reading Adirondack things, and I came to it from his collection of short stories, which just called Adirondack Stories, and those stories are pretty great.
Yeah.
They're direct. The characters seem three-dimensional, and surprising things happen. So I had expectations, and then this came out, and it's fight a little confusion, draw a map so you know where you're going, and then see where it goes. And then on reviewing it just recently, it's like, oh my gosh, this is a challenge. In a way, all the different voices reminded me of Lincoln and the Bardo.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that.
I mean, a very different book for sure, but you have to keep a lot of different voices straight. And you know, not everybody in that book is telling the truth, and of course, some people don't exist at all. But yeah, it's a challenge to follow.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow,
Let's give Lincoln and the Bardo as well. Ellen, did you want to say something? It looked like you wanted to say something.
Oh no, this is very helpful. I mean, I don't deal in literature in this way, so this is very interesting for me, very helpful. Yeah.
I really enjoyed, even though a great many of the characters to my ears sounded the same. They sounded the same in an interesting way. I mean, the kind of folk chunks that would come out of their mouths, these amazing jokes and cracks and homilies and preposterous, exaggerated tall tales and stories. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I felt like he was sort of perusing a great book of American folklore for expressions and, locutions, ways of talking about the weather or whatever, but it still was charming to read and fun, and a lot of it was very fresh to me. Betsy, you were saying that your neighbors in the Adirondacks speak this way all the time, so I'm being too cynical.
well, not all the time. But the ones who are dead now talk like that.
I actually was more taken with the dialogue. Maybe I've sat around with guys bullshitting more, but
Yeah.
I could pick out the individuals, and I could pick out who is more likable, who's less likable, who is somebody you wouldn't want to divulge something to, and so on and so forth. So
Yeah,
I actually did find that part of it successful.
yeah.
Good.
Anyone else? What did you think of the history? I'm curious. Did that seem forced or overstretched, or did it seem right on the money given today's effort to hitch up with our problematic past and bring it to life and make it part of our present and contend with it?
I liked that. I mean, even though I skimmed some of it, I like the idea of that. And it made me actually want to think about the original sources a little bit more. And early on in the book, I was reading it, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Did you have a favorite passage or episode in that category? Did anyone?
Oh, let me look here.
What about you, Bets?
I can't pull out the book and
Yeah.
read it to you. I'm sorry, but I don't know. I just for a lot of scenes, I felt like, oh my gosh, I know what he's talking about. I could see the pond. I can see this. I could see the dusty streets. I could see the general store.
Yeah.
I could see the Warren County home.
That's right.
Well, one thing that struck me about the historical passages, and I actually think this is a strength, although it might come off sounding like I don't, I actually teach early American literature. I teach the voices that are supposedly speaking here, and he's not making any attempt whatsoever to duplicate those voices.
Yeah.
The most obvious example is Columbus. No, Columbus's journal doesn't read anything like that whatsoever. But it works completely because he's not attempting that.
Yeah.
He is saying, okay, in this vocabulary that we have in the 1940s America, this is what people are saying, and I think it's charming for not attempting to particularly imitate the actual way of writing and speaking of the time.
I really liked the section, hard as it was to read in a way, but the section where the enslaved man escapes and makes his way north, this arduous step-by-step tracing of his struggle to escape, to not be caught, to the wretchedness of it. It felt very vivid to me in a way the parts of the actual narrative didn't. That one jumped up,
Mm-hmm.
felt, and really worked. And I also admire the fact that he includes in his idea of othered people, not just America Smith, but anybody who isn't white by the standards of the time, meaning the Jewish guy, Native Americans, no matter how intermarried with white people they were, anybody remotely, an out of wedlock kid who's automatically not white just by virtue of being a bastard kid. It just, the idea of otherness here is a big umbrella. It's a big cape that includes a lot of people in that town. And when Bishop says candidly at the end, this used to be a white place, it's going to be a white place again, we're going to make this happen, that rings true to our sense of rural American history, sadly. That is an effort that was strong and long and proud in rural parts of the country and in parts of cities too. But that was bold of the writer, I think, to say this isn't just about black and white. This is about anyone who isn't white by the idea of whiteness at that time, which is pretty limited. Anyone else have that sense? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was a bold step. And that was probably the most prescient, interesting part of the book for me, to create an alliance or a kindred community among these outsiders, these othered people who find common ground.
Amy, were you almost going to say a fraternity, though?
It might have been close. Did I back off? Good for me. I caught myself.
Well, but I mean, the fact that women are largely excluded from the conversation also suggests, I mean, that's a statement in and of itself. And the way you've just described, I think, this umbrella of otherness, that would seem to be deliberate on Sanford's part. I can't believe, given how he's constructed this, that he isn't making a conscious choice to have this be a fairly male conversation.
Yeah.
No?
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that he is very aware that, you know, we talk today about white privilege, and we talk about it it's right that we're talking about it. And that in a community where white privilege is important, which is every community in America, everybody wants to exclude as many people from that as they can so that they then get to enjoy a greater privilege. And I think Sanford's very good about that. I don't think that he was thinking about gender. I think he was thinking about all of the other things you've mentioned. Mm-hmm. The lack of women characters with agency and personality and so on and so forth. Yeah, I think that's a weakness on his part, not a deliberate strategy, but you know, that's just my sense of it.
I'm almost grateful that there weren't more women characters, because
they're all so bad.
Right, honestly, the women or the girls who are pictured are, most of them have very little of the sort of character or the personality or the sparkle of the men, who are, even the reprehensible men, have more of a sense of self and more style and more of a way with words and more of a presence on the page than the poor girl who is molested by her employer, by Peabody, the parson, or the woman who just wants her husband to stop attacking her every night because she's tired and has had enough and isn't going to have kids. And none of these women get much of a say in their moment on the page, and that's kind of frustrating.
I think the thing about the women is they're all defined in the context of the men.
That's right.
You have a prostitute, you have the person who is a wife, you have a person who is like a maid, and that's how they're defined, not by themselves.
America, though, seems sometimes she chooses not to speak.
Yeah.
You know, the doc tries to get and the parson tries to get her to talk and tell her, and she just won't. I think she exercises a little bit of control.
Do we ever have, did I miss this? Do we ever have any understanding of why she fetched up in Warrensburg, or this invented Warrensburg? It's a great mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
So she's there as the catalyst who brings out the worst and best in the community, is the kind of.
Didn't she say she could have ended up anywhere?
Did she say that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's why she wasn't going to leave, because she was just going to go any other
That's
place and
right.
have to leave there too.
Any other place?
That's right. She does say that. So this is, it gets back to Paul's remark. This is anywhere in small town America or small town Northern America. She could expect to meet this reception. Huh. But I still, nonetheless, I missed for a little more Adirondack particularity. Maybe that's just because I wanted it to feel more like a true Adirondack novel for my own selfish purposes, because I don't think one's been written that I'm aware of, and I would really give anything to read a great novel of the Adirondacks. I don't know. Bets, is there one I'm forgetting about?
Boy, well, it's, I mean, when we were putting this book club together, it was,
Pretty thin sledding.
well, I mean, we talked about having Loon Lake by Doctorow as one of the books. And, you know, Cloud Splitter by Russell Banks. And
Right.
yeah, we withdrew from some of these partly because of the length.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a challenge.
Yeah. Any more thoughts on the characterization or the plot or anything else about the book you want to think about? Should we move on to?
Well, actually, I would like to, you know, throw it back to folks in the group.
Yeah.
If they have an idea for an Adirondack novel to talk about in a future book club section, you know, let Natalie know, because, you know, there are some more recent books that are, you know, pretty specific. We Are Gathered Here, for instance.
Well, that's a good book.
Yeah.
My daughter
So-
just read that a week ago, actually. And because I had recommended it to, I read it years ago. Betsy, maybe you recommended it to me. I couldn't even remember it, and I still had it on my bookshelf. And she just read that. And Northern Lights too was another book that we were considering.
Yep.
What about Mason Smith's?
I haven't read his novel or
It's
novels. Yeah.
harsh. Betsy, what do you think?
I haven't been able to read it either. I mean, well, or which one?
Well, the Florida one.
Florida, okay, because
Yeah.
there's a sequel.
Yeah, I haven't read the sequel, but I read Florida. It was republished under a different name called Polaris or something like that, but it's the same book. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, if any of you think of a novel for us to read, let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be useful, because there are books out there that, for one reason or another, we've overlooked, and you know, this is a reading crowd, so we'd love to hear. So, Amy, should we move on to Adirondack Portraits?
Well, I just wanted to talk about one thing before we do. I don't know how our time is. Nat, are we good for a few more remarks?
Yeah, so it's 7:45 right now, and I think I have us down for an hour. I honestly don't remember.
Oh, we should move on to Adirondack Portraits then.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm gonna try to look it up while you talk. So go ahead. Maybe we're an hour and a half.
I mean, it's a good, for me, this speaks a little bit against what Paul Johnston was saying. I have a different impression, but the generic quality of The People from Heaven, which lost me, where I felt I could be in Crackersville anywhere in America. Even the way people spoke, I felt was oddly unspecific to place. In Adirondack Portraits, I had a really keen sense of place and a keen sense of a way of thinking and talking about your experience that seemed very true to the Adirondack world as I understand it, or as I've read of it, or as I've heard it in my own experience. Really plain speech concealing extremely deep feeling, hard loss and hard times, but so simply put, it almost seems in a way like literal bland narration until you read a little more deeply or read it a little harder and you feel like you've been kicked in the head by some incredible experience of hers as a young girl. I don't know. I find these poems really moving for me, very stirring, and I'm amazed how she gets that reaction from me with so little in the way of fancy language, elaborate metaphors, complicated literary devices. It's just in good observing. This feels like an Adirondack looked at from the inside out, just very deep experience, really sharply and sympathetically observed from someone who was in it, who was there. So I really like this book a lot myself. Anyone else? Teachers are never supposed to lead off with their own opinions. I apologize for that.
Well, I want to throw this out there. Adronic Portraits came together, after her death.
Yeah.
And she did publish 2 books of poetry in 1916. And was it Noel Rediger Johnson who put Adirondack Portraits together? She had a lot of material from which to choose. And I don't know if you read either of the earlier books published in 1916, if you'd have the density of experience like you're talking about.
We have no idea what was left on
Exactly.
the cutting room floor. So could be this represents a fraction of a much greater, maybe more mediocre body of work, and we're only seeing the gems, or that there are amazing things down there on the cutting room floor we're never going to see. Right?
Well, we'll never know. But that struck me as like, well, it wasn't, we have no idea if that's what her intent was.
Yeah.
She did publish these poems and someone mixed them up and, made them maybe more palatable to modern readers. I mean, 1916 was a pretty long time ago.
She's reading early Robert Frost, I think. I think he was writing his first poems then. He seems like for me, an influence I want to believe was in the wings hovering, but I think Kate says as much. Yeah. Anybody read his introduction to the book? It's good.
Yeah.
What do you think of it, Jonathan?
I thought it was super interesting. I mean, I thought the connection between this very remote local environment, which she's got such a good understanding of, and this, outside cosmopolitan world with the connections with all these major intellectuals, really fascinating. The thing I was wondering, actually, maybe people who know more about her could comment on it, is sort of who is the intended audience of the poems? Because, I mean, this is still a time, right, when there's actually quite a big popular audience for poetry, which sort of has got a narrative in it, Kipling, etc. But a lot of the writing of that time, I think, about rural life around the English-speaking world, really, is about is often actually about addressing urban people, about rural people, and giving them a sort of sense of authenticity. So, you get, like in Australia, you get Henry Lawson, who's writing about the outback and the guys rounding up the sheep and all this kind of thing, but actually he's basically a Melbourne journalist, and she's interesting because she's the real thing in a way that Henry Lawson really wasn't, or only partially was.
Yeah. If that's the case, then I think she's pleading for sympathy and for patience and for a deeper understanding of rural types who might appear at first glimpse to be good candidates for the county home, but in fact aren't when you look harder at their circumstance. Good candidates for censure from us looking down at them as Sanford does. But no, if you get into their lives and see the circumstance that drives look at the Irish family in that wonderful poem, who refuse to leave their farm or visit with neighbors. They're incredibly eccentric, everyone thinks. But then she shares with us the fact that they were driven to the United States by the famine, and owning land is the most precious thing they can imagine, and leaving it for even a moment could risk a raid or seizure or losing it somehow. And with this historical grounding in the poem, you have sympathy for them. You understand it. It makes sense. Or the woman who won't part with anything she has for the antique dealer who comes by. It's one of my favorite poems because I completely get it. Do you remember that one? He wants this and he wants that, and she says, "No, I use that. This is part of my life story, and it's how I know who I am. These are my friends. These things." Which sounds insane, but in the poem it's entirely plausible. She gives everything that might seem eccentric, odd, even wrong, a context, a deeper personal context that makes it valuable and sympathetic and human. And I think that's singular. That's a real gift.
Well, it's a very remarkable poem, because the antique dealer could be her.
Yeah, that's right.
Somebody who just wants to come around and get these things and show them to people and so on, as commodities to purchase. And the woman is saying, no, this is my life. You can't just cart it away for somebody else. I'm still living this life.
Yeah. That reminds me of something else she says in another poem, I forget which, but it really struck me. She's talking about land. It's one of the later poems, because the question of the Adirondack Park is coming up in her life, and she's all for it. And she's saying, when I look at land, this is the narrator of one of the poems, I see it from the inside out. I see it in terms of a long, organic, annual process of sowing and cultivating and reaping and harvesting, and then the whole thing again, and I see it in time. I don't see it as an outsider, as a moment, but as an experience, something to be experienced and known personally and worked and understood in that way, as a historical process. If you don't have that understanding of land, you don't know what land is. You're just a tourist here. That was a beautiful poem, and that really struck me. It sort of speaks to what you're saying, a very inside view, but moving. Allison, you're just coming in. How did you like this book?
I haven't finished it yet, so I didn't really want to participate too much. I just wanted to listen. And I actually didn't hear your conversation. I just had to step away because somebody was at the door.
Yeah, sure.
But I've been enjoying just getting in and listening.
Let me turn off this infernal foam. Ellen, can you speak about it?
No, I'm in. I'm in Allison's. I've read a few things, but I haven't kind of put the whole thing together. I mean, it's because it's we have the poems and then we have the annotation, and I love the biography of it all, and yet I need to really engage the poetry, but I haven't yet. So
well, one of the things that really strikes me about her career and how it refers back to these poems, or maybe vice versa, is she goes to England for a while after she marries well and travels all over Europe and England and meets all the fancy people in the glitterati of Europe and England. She also spends time learning about England, the English welfare state, and how it provides impoverished people with public housing. And she's really impressed by this model. She studies it. And later in life, when she's not writing, at least not the way she did as a young woman, she's working for the housing authority or something in Schenectady. She's working in public housing. When you look back at the poems in this, there's such a concern with shelter and with housing and the relationship with weather and housing. And the Adirondacks, after all, as we know, is all about housing and keeping warm and not keeping the walls up and keeping shoes on your feet. Every poem in it in some way has to do with holding nature at bay and keeping safe, keeping warm. And so that theme of her childhood, when she was shipped as, in a way, a foster kid from house to house, when her parents couldn't keep her at home because it was one too many mouths to feed, speaks to her choice later in life as a housing expert and counselor, and also to the themes of her poetry. There's a kind of neat passage there you can track. It's beautiful, I think. Anyone else on Ms. Foster? Bets, what do you think?
I totally agree. I mean, it is fascinating that she could fit so much into her life.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at any one phase of her life, she was, you know, at the top of her game, it seemed. And, you know, so well regarded by people. And then coming back to Schenectady to care for ailing family and bringing all the things that she's learned, you know, from England. You know, she never got a college degree, and I think Union gave her an honorary degree.
It did.
And you know, the city of Schenectady gave her a Patroon Award, which is a very high honor. But you know, all this happened when she was really old.
Yeah.
And you know, but she did get recognition during the different phases of her life, I think.
Well, getting an introduction by Alfred Kazin is pretty golden.
Oh yeah.
He's a renowned and wonderful critic, and to have him canonize you by comparing you to Frost and having these kind words was a nice stroke for her. But I still think maybe the great Adirondack novel might be about her, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? Tracking her story. Yeah, right back to her grave in Chestertown.
I was fascinated by the Jack Yates connection.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are familiar with Jack Yates, but he is the most unbelievably great painter, even though much less well known than his brother. But the thing about the Yateses was, of course, also that they were coming out of this profound interest in the Irish peasantry and kind of folk wisdom and peasant experience and mythology. And I wondered whether that was maybe sort of somewhere to do with why they bonded.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Again, the biography hasn't been written that would bring this to life. I'd love to know if more of her poems will ever be published, and if there are any plans. Does anyone have a clue?
Union College has her letters.
Really?
And you know, boxes and boxes and boxes of letters and poems and pieces of poems, and just a treasure trove.
Yeah.
And I, you know, and doing a little rummaging around, I did see that there was a Jean Robert Foster symposium in 2004 in Chestertown.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And so that pops up. There's probably, you know, I didn't get a chance to go very deeply into that. I assume there were papers presented about different aspects of her life. And then, you know, and going through the poems again, I thought, my gosh, you know, wouldn't this make a fascinating one woman like theater piece?
Yes.
Yeah.
We actually, ACW did dramatic readings of her poems. Jeanne Lafferty, she's a storyteller and a dramatic reader, and she did those for us. And I feel like I can never read her poems again because I've been so spoiled by that experience. Just hearing, I mean, she just did a phenomenal job, and she has a huge love for her work, Jeanne does. So it was really wonderful to hear that that reading by someone who deeply appreciated every word. It was a really great, yeah.
When did you do that?
Oh, it was years ago.
Do it again.
Do it again. Yeah, you know, well, we were going to do another dramatic reading, but I think Jeanne would really like it. It was this showcase of Adirondack art, and there were different disciplines, and we were supposed to present about literature, of course. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, I mean, it's kind of a weird, it was a hard thing to sort of present. So instead, I chose to do dramatic readings of key things. We did a bit of Cloud Splitter, trying to remember who did that. Oh, I had a local actor, actually. And then she did Jean Roth Forster, and Rich Frost did
We did Old Mountain Phelps.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, cool.
That was a while ago, but I would definitely do that again. It was yeah, and her work really would be lends itself to theater.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll come.
Okay.
Well, or do a video, put it online.
Yeah,
Good idea.
that'd be great too. Are there other thoughts about this book, or did anybody have a super favorite poem that we haven't mentioned or discussed here that knocked you out? The Moonies, the Catholic poem. I love that. Talk about your othered population. I mean, there were one of the reasons I like this is that it recognizes the diversity in this tiny part of this small town that has nothing to do with race, but has everything to do with gradations of class and an apprehension of background. The French Canadians have their way. The Irish have their thing going on. The super poor white people have their culture, and her world, which is clinging fiercely to a middle class culture, if they can't afford it, has its distinction. And everybody's very hyper conscious of this caste system in this little world, and it does influence everything. Did anyone find that to be true? Again, it's a sociological take on it, but it's one of the things about it that's felt very real and very compelling to me. I like that. Me too. Slice of life thing. I can think of another niche that you might explore in other reading series, and that would be great Adirondack journals, if they're available, which make for terrific reading. I mean, if you want to get really specific and not deal with novels that are sort of generic or universalizing in their approach to regionalism, journals are a good way to go.
Well, I mean, access to those would be interesting. They'd have to be put into a formula that people could get to. You know, I've certainly seen plenty of handwritten things at the Adirondack Experience in the library, but
Yeah,
that's one-on-one, you know, and which is an amazing way to experience a piece of writing, is to sit there with a handwritten page.
yeah.
But I like that idea. I mean, I think you'd have to choose very wisely, because some of these journals are, you know, you have to read a lot of days before something funny, interesting, tragic happens.
Or autobiographies. That's another thing.
Well, if you have any ideas, Helene, actually, when we were talking about novels, I saw that she suggested The Air We Breathe
Right.
by Andrea Barrett.
Mhm.
Again, ECW brought Andrea Barrett, and how many years ago
That's a
was
great
that?
idea.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. That's a good book. Well, I think it's a marvelous book.
Yeah.
So,
Wasn't as good as her other books, though, and it was so disappointing.
Well, Servants of the Map, and
that's a good book.
Yeah.
no, The Air We Breathe is so very, very specific.
Yeah.
You know, to a time, a place, to certain people. Yeah.
I believe she's living in the Adirondacks now, or is thinking of moving to the region.
Really?
Yeah,
She has a connection over to like the Westport area. She seems
that's
to
right.
keep popping up over there.
Yeah, she's good friends with folks there at the Grange and has a world there, she and her husband. I think they were looking at a home, so they could be your new Adirondack writers du jour. Yeah.
Well, I think we should stop now, right? And I want to thank Betsy and Amy. You guys have just created such a really interesting conversation, and really plucked a lot of threads and interesting conversation about both of the books. Thanks for suggesting the books. I wouldn't have read The People from Heaven if it hadn't been suggested, I have to say. And thank you guys for joining us. If we do another program, like, you know, maybe The Air We Breathe or another one, we'll obviously let you all know. But I just wanted to thank you very much. Every time, I have to say, I'm going to sound like a jerk, but I just deeply enjoy the way Betsy and Amy express themselves. care what they're talking about, but it is always just a real pleasure for me. So thank you so much. I
Well,
really
you're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
But
Thank
I
you, Natalie.
want to mention that there are some more books in this series that, of course, had been intended for in-person discussion. And Anne LaBastile's Woodswoman is next up, hosted by the Adirondack Experience. And then Chris Jerome's An Adirondack Passage after that. And the whole package of book club type things, you know, we planned it for a year thinking, oh, let's just see how it goes, see if people really are attracted to it, are engaged with it. So, you know, moving forward, we want to just, you know, see if this is a viable kind of program to continue.
Mm.
I gotta say that the very first session with Adventures in the Wilderness was, I believe, 3 staff members of the Adirondack Experience and me. But it was in the winter, so.
Yeah.
I know they're
Well, that's
doing,
when it should be popular.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I know. Well, I keep telling Betsy this, but they were doing Anne LaBastile. But what I really want is someone to talk about Anne LaBastile and talk about the sexism that is pervasive around everything about her. I mean, all the controversy and all the drama wouldn't exist if she were a man. And I find it really interesting. And I think that she's a compelling human because she was beautiful and she did flirt with men to get them to, you know, shovel her roof, and she did do all those things, and I think it makes her a really interesting person, but unfortunately the conversations about her are always so one-dimensional. And I think the fact that she had all these dogs and pink nail polish and, you know, all at the same time makes her a much more fascinating person, and no one ever talks about that part of her. So I know the museum didn't maybe want to, but if we ever talk about Anne LaBastile at ACW, I want to talk about it.
Well, I mean, that program is yet to happen, so certainly it's legit to bring that up.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool. Anyway, thank you all. It was lovely.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
To meet you. Yeah,
Great
Thank you.
meeting you. Thank you both again.
you bet.
Thank you.
See you
Bye.
later.